It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Arizona Cardinals fans, welcome into the Redbird Reboot podcast. I'm Blake Murphy, and joined as always by Marcos Labrada. We are here to talk Arizona Cardinals draft. A live draft is happening right now for those of you who are still, after 2 days later, watching day 3 of the draft. It's the longest day of the NFL draft. The amount of players who are picked today, some gems, some end up being diamonds in the rough. There's also times you'll find fools, gold, or players who just are not going to necessarily make it the same way in the league, but that's not what we care about, Marcos. Today, what we care about ultimately is how you've been doing thus far and any other thoughts on the draft so far.
Well, I'm very happy with our first round pick. Our second round pick is going to be somewhat of a project, but happy with him as well. And then it's been like a roller coaster from there. But I would have to say I'm mostly positive about the draft. I'm mostly happy about the way it's been going. And, of course, we got our first selection out of the way at 104th, like about an hour ago. So we're going to see if we can get that fifth round pick in.
Absolutely, yes. We're going to be doing our full recap next week and next Monday, going through pick by pick with some analysis. But overall, I think a lot of Cardinals fans can say it feels very much like the first round was a huge surprise to just about everyone with the way that the quarterbacks went. We all knew quarterbacks were going to go early. We also knew that there was going to be a big run on those wide receivers. And Marcos, the Arizona Cardinals have gone out and addressed a bunch of different needs with some corners, some trade backs, and some other parts. Let's do a little bit of a quick recap thus far. If you had to pick your favorite pick that the Arizona Cardinals have made thus far that is not named Marvin Harrison Jr., who would that be thus far?
I'd have to go with the second cornerback that was taken. I'm not like I haven't gone through the list of like what their names are and whatnot because the ones that stand out is the tight end. I actually am not. I like the tight end. I think it was a good pick as well. But the cornerback that was taken in the third round that I'm high on because of the fact that like one. Anytime you hear somebody, like if you listen to the bootleg podcast, a friend of ours, EJ Snyder's on it. They gush about like a certain player or whatnot, and they talk about how this person slipped through the cracks. That was the corner that was taken in the third round that slipped through the cracks. He has size. He doesn't have the longest arms, but really doesn't matter because we need somebody with like size when it comes to the outside position. We have 5'10", 5'9" corners in our space right now. And he was seen as somewhat like somebody that was just kind of like a hidden gem. So I'm really high on that pick. And that's so far my favorite pick of the draft. That's not the first round.
Yeah, the Cardinals, I think we talked about it all year, how much it would be beneficial for a team to trade up and give them potentially 3 first-round picks versus staying for Marvin Harrison Jr. The end of the day, Marcos, we got to see that no quarterback was actually given up for with a future first-round pick. Even the New England Patriots did not trade back with the teams that were looking to trade up with them. I think that's where a lot of Cardinals fans have seen with Monti Cooking. There's been a willingness to stick and pick, whereas last year they were aggressive. We've not seen any trade-ups so far this year. We've seen the Cardinals be able to attack a lot of needs. They go after Darius Robinson at pick number 27, a big, lengthy pass rusher / run defender who's played inside and out with some of that versatility. This is one of the picks that I was kind of torn a bit on because we knew for a while that this was a guy that they were planning on taking if he was able to fall to 27. I talked a lot about how much I did like Johnny Newton, who fell with a foot injury, a little bit more undersized, whereas Darius Robinson has that prototypical size where you can either put him inside, where he can rush from the interior, or can be able to line up at the edge. Can also be a bit of a tweener in that regard, though, as far as with the weight. And when you talk about tweeners, you think of kind of a combination of, hey, what did we talk about with the likes of a Cameron Thomas? What did we talk about with a Zach Allen? Even Calais Campbell had to gain weight to get up to 300 pounds or so on that 6'8" frame before he was able to really see a lot of success in the NFL. This is one of those places where Cardinals fans can at least say, hey, this is another guy on the defensive line. It's a guy who can line up at least and probably would be one of your guys that can stay on the field through all three downs because of that versatility. But it's not necessarily a elite pass rusher. I know a lot of fans had wanted the Cardinals to trade up for one of those top three guys. We end up seeing the likes of Laitu Latu, Dallas Turner both go in the top 17 picks, Jared Verse going right after them. None of these guys, Marcos, went top 10. There was a lot of people who had hoped that the Cardinals could grab one of these players. We end up seeing Chop Robinson go all the way at 21. A lot of Cardinals fans are wondering who's going to be rushing the passer, and the answer, it seems right now, is going to be Darius Robinson and the likes of guys that they had last year, including Zaven Collins.
Yeah, I had to. Speaking about the Bootleg podcast, I'm not sure if you were watching part of it, but EJ Snyder mentioned that he had an insider that had given him a tip about that the Cardinals are going to pick Darius Robinson at number 27, and that was like the hour before the pick was made. And I'm guessing, I'm taking a wild guess to see who was that insider who gave him that tip. Was it you, Blake?
Yeah, it was me actually who sent that inside tip. Yes, so we had heard at least for some of that they love Robinson and all of those things. So I sent EJ, said, hey, they might take Robinson if they're going to be here for the most part, and he was just like, yep, all right, there it goes. So yeah, we don't get a lot of like true inside information. A lot of times teams don't even know it's going to happen, but there's always little things that can trickle out. So sometimes you'll end up hearing some people just be ready. Like we'll sometimes get a tip. Famous one was JJ Watt signing. We got that tip like a couple days before, and we had articles ready to go. It's like, we don't get paid to be like insiders to publish some of that stuff. We just are like trying to make sure we can get our stuff out on time, and we're like fans too. We want to know what's going on with the team. But yeah, you did catch me there, at least for the for the most part, at least.
Because you texted that to me. You let me know, hey, the Cardinals they like Darius Robinson at number 27, and number 27 comes around. Darius Robinson is the pick. Now, talking about that pick, since his size is kind of in a person that's in between an edge and a defensive tackle, they announced him as a defensive tackle, at least when the Cardinals announced it on Twitter and whatnot. The thing about him is he's like 285 pounds, 6'5", not very athletic. So that was the drawback on him, because nowadays you have to blow out the combine with like explosiveness when it comes to like the 40 and it comes to the broad jump. That's what they're looking for when it comes to like edge rushers, because that translates to explosiveness, and he wasn't a very athletic type of defensive tackle / defensive end. My take on him was, and I'm trying to hopefully this doesn't become a situation where we took a versatile guy like we have before and then we either put him in a different position, him change. I would like for them to keep him at that weight and then have him be like the defensive end, like the hand on the ground, rushing from the outside type of person, not the outside shoulder of the tackle. Not all the time. You can line him up there as well, but have him mainly stay on the inside shoulder of the tackle, inside shoulder of the tackle, outside shoulder of the guard. So basically a B gap type of player. And, you can move him around like you do any other defensive tackle. But I would think he would find better success rushing within the C gaps and not so much on the outside.
Yeah, I agree, at least for those. For those kind of wondering, at least like A gaps, B gaps, C gaps, a lot of football people. A gaps, what you want to think about is the middle of the line. So you're talking about you're going to have your center who's going to be right up the middle. And then you got the two guys standing usually on either side of the center. That's going to be kind of looking at the A gap. So when you're talking about an A gap blitz, think of when you had Isaiah Simmons, maybe Buddha, guys lining up right over the center with all of those guys on the line, and then overloading the middle of the line to get pressure right away on the quarterback. B gap is going to be the guys who are going to be outside of that, where a lot of times you'll want to try to keep stuff in front of you, where instead of getting that outside running for the most part. So think of this as more as like these are going to be the defensive ends. This is going to be the 5 technique. If 0 and 1 technique is lining up right over your center, you're going to have 3 technique. Think of the Aaron Donald, try to split those 2 guards. 5 technique, that's going to be your typical 4-3 defensive end on the sides. And then of course you're going to have 7 is going to be kind of your pass rushing, kind of holding the edge. And then wide 9, you think of how the Eagles would line up, at least with legs of Hassan Reddick and a smaller guy like Nolan Smith. Just get your speed rushers, get them outside as quick of a lane to the quarterback as possible. Cardinals, I think, at least, like you said, Marcos, this is a guy that is a prototypical defensive end, but I think that, like you said, Cardinals listed him at DT. The fact that he'll be able to switch inside makes me think that he could play some 3 technique, which would be able to get some running onto the passer. He's got a really good motor. He's got great size with arm length. The way that I would say, if you wanted to describe him, is let's say that you take Marcus Golden, you add 30 pounds to the guy, and he's going to have that upper body strength for the most part. What's nice about him is it's not just that he is one of those players who's going to try to just get through effort. He is a very big student of the game, very big culture guy for the most part. I think they mentioned it in his interview yesterday. Stayed around an extra year in college. He's 24 years old, a bit older with the COVID year as well, has 2 degrees, and he's talked about his video with his film preparation. One of the biggest things that I think that we can say with Marcus Golden that we loved about him, but the way that he was as a player, he was a pass rusher first. He was not necessarily a run defender. That's one of the things that changes with Darius Robinson. Darius Robinson was the only player in the SEC the last couple of years who had a high enough PFF rushing and pass rushing grade as one other player in particular. And that player, of course, is someone that Cardinals fans will be familiar with because it's the guy that they did not draft last year. That would be Will Anderson Jr., guy who was taken 3rd overall last year with the Arizona Cardinals. Marcos, that's one thing that I think is very interesting when you take a look at what the Cardinals are looking for. He's not the top-notch pass rusher that maybe Johnny Newton was, but he's a guy who has production, has the sacks for the most part, like that one, and he also is very capable against the run. We can go over some of just the pros and cons, but ultimately, this is the pick the Cardinals got from the Houston Texans. We'll be able to go over their total picks that they got in the trade for the most part. And I think the biggest gap is it more important to get that top-notch blue chip edge rusher, or looking at guys that they got in addition to Paris Johnson? It kind of feels in some ways like maybe things will change, but I almost feel like the Paris, if he becomes a franchise standout tackle this year, you probably feel like that trade was a wash for the Arizona Cardinals if Darius Robinson's able to succeed.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where the whole the whole hindsight 2020 situation is gonna play out, because for now, we'll understand after his first year has performed. So we have no idea how Darius Robinson is gonna perform. We've seen 1 year Paris Johnson, and Paris Johnson, to me, I just hope he starts picking it up, going linear from there, because he has 1 year experience. He's got the snaps. He got 1,000 snaps as a offensive tackle. So for the second year in a row, for his second year, you should start seeing an upward trajectory for him. So I believe that the Cardinals made this move specifically because of the fact that not only have we been horrible when it comes to stopping the run, we need people who are run stoppers more so than we need pass rushers at this point, because of the fact that we get gashed in the run whenever we fall behind. It's like a ball control, time control game afterwards. Offenses keep the ball away from our offenses by running the ball consistently on our defense, milking that clock, taking their time to get to the line of scrimmage, turn around, handing it off to the running back, over and over and over again. We've seen this happen so many times, and this puts our offense in a bad position because they have less time to operate. And if they're giving up a lead, which is a double deuce to us, like, hey, not only are you guys not allowing us to get back on the field, you gave up a lead, or you're giving up a touchdown, you're giving up a whatever it is, and now we have to operate where we have to throw the ball almost at every down so we can catch up. That puts a lot of stress on your offense. That's why I kept mentioning about Vance Joseph and his scheme. Like, if he's allowing chunk yardage, even if he get down to the red zone and you don't allow him to score and you give up a field goal, you still lost all that time, and then the offense has to come back out. So I believe this move was more so made not only for two things. He must have blown him out of the water with the interview that he had. So that's one. He looks like a standout guy. So that's two. And he's a run stuffing, like, tweener type of guy that can, be used in a situation where you can use him on a first, second down, like in the interior, and then you can rush him in the exterior if you want on third down. So he's an every down type of a guy that you're trying to build with on your defensive line as the leader and the lead person. I believe that played a big factor in not only them liking him so much, but picking him at 27. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of things you can say about the Cardinals. I think the biggest thing that you can look at is the approach that they've had to building this team is different. There is a huge emphasis on size and, of course, not just positional versatility, but positional value with some of that versatility. I think we can at least talk a little bit now about the biggest move the Cardinals have made, of course, in sticking and picking. As people said, like, whether it's hold the line is what people want, but people said stick and pick. That was the guy that the Cardinals wanted. And what's interesting, I think, Marcos, is people are going to look back and look at two, maybe three players in particular. And it's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. It's going to be Joe Alt to the Chargers. It's going to be Malik Neighbors to the Giants. And it's going to be Rome Odunze. The Cardinals did not seem to get an offer big enough to move up. And I think the reason why, when we look at it, is because the Minnesota Vikings made a second move up. They go and move up for Dallas Turner. Something I think Cardinals fans had wondered, would that be a move that the Cardinals could make to move up for the likes of Dallas Turner? And I think that was something that they really liked Darius Robinson. They were looking not necessarily to give up a couple of third-round picks. They did not want to clearly give up pick number 35. And you got to say, at least, that the approach that Monti has taken has been getting a lot of people in on the defensive line, being able to then look at getting a couple of bodies for the secondary. We'll talk about that second pick here, and getting a preparation, I should say, a plan in place for some of their top players after this year. So let's go a quick one or two takes, at least, for the rest of the Cardinals draft. Now here we'll be doing our full recap, obviously, again. Let's talk first about Marv. Is there anything else that you have to say about the pick? Because I feel like this has already been shared plenty enough for the most part. Mostly it's Cardinals fans. We're probably more excited about this pick since any pick, even since the likes of Kyler Murray. People have said the Matt Leinart pick for the most part. This is one of the maybe defining picks for the Arizona Cardinals as a franchise.
I do believe that when this pick was made, it did have Kyler Murray, like his decision making was put into play. So I do believe that did weigh into it, because to be honest with you, I when I saw how excited he got, I was like thinking to myself, well, I mean, I think you're excited because you knew like this was the guy that you just couldn't pass up on, and it was going to be a major help when it came to like the offense, especially on third and longs, having that X receiver back. So there's what hasn't been said about Marvin Harrison Jr. that at this point that we can say again, other than the fact that like this guy was projected to be like on a Hall of Fame trajectory before he even came onto the league. Not only because of the fact that the lineage is there, but he came out as the best receiver on his own wide receiver class. And it's a deep wide receiver class.
Multiple wide receiver class, because you got to remember, we saw Jackson Smith and Jigba as a top 12 pick last year. I think first round pick last year for sure. We saw guys in Chris Olave, guys in Garrett Wilson go the year before. And we've seen that he's been like the most highly rated out of all of those guys. It was so much, at least, that we can say with the likes of Kyler Murray, and we can at least see with the reaction here, which shout out, of course, with Kyler being in that old school Anquan Bolden uniform. Some Cardinals fans have wanted to order one of those number 18 jerseys. You can see his friend there, at least. We're watching the Kyler Murray video. He's live watching as the Cardinals are about to take Marvin Harrison Jr., recorded from his phone, rocking that old 2004 white with the Arizona flag, Anquan Bolden jersey. Most people have seen the video. Super excited overall, just with the fact that you think about where Kyler was a couple of years ago, and you think he was in a place where we said, you probably need to go out and get one of those type of top playmakers. They went and did that with DeAndre Hopkins. They need to get another playmaker. They go out and get Hollywood Brown. It just doesn't necessarily work. And they entered this year without either of those guys on the roster. And now you're able to see, at least if you're a Cardinals fan, some cool moments. Kyler's been seemingly at the facility all the time. He even walks in while Marvin's getting an interview on the Cards Cover 2 podcast and just basically crashes the interview. Like, he just walks right into the recording room as Marvin is being interviewed. Everyone just reacts, at least. He just kind of goes. And apparently this is like the first time that Kyler Murray had probably met Marvin Harrison Jr. from what we know. Like, he just walks in, wants to greet him right away for the most part. The funniest part is with everyone standing down, Kyler just looks huge in that room. Everyone knows that he's not the tallest quarterback, but it does show at least that there's an actual excitement that there is for Cardinals fans. And part of that, I think, is when we talk about culture, there's a bunch of questions people had about Murray. Can he step up? Is he a leader? Is he likable? Is he going to be putting in the work and the effort and studying? And what we've really kind of seen in a lot of ways is when he got the guys in place, who was a general manager who's had good draft picks. We'll go over there in a quick second because we'll be cutting to looking at the pick as it's made here in just a minute if the Cardinals assumedly don't trade back. We're talking about some great optimism for Cardinals fans just with how this culture is seemingly shaping up. And it's a culture that's not doing things in spite of the quarterback, but in a lot of ways with and because of the quarterback, which I think is exactly what Cardinals fans have wanted to see.
Yeah, well, I do like the way that he crashed that interview because, like, if you're gonna make an introduction, better make it while try to catch your people off guard, so you can get like a sincere look. Like, basically, you're getting them when they're like not expecting it, but that's like a sincere reaction and whatnot. And Jesus, did you see how, like, when Marvin Harrison Jr. like, I know he's 6'4", 6'3", when he stood up for that little bit, for that half a second, and then he sat back down. I was like, yeah, that's a big guy. That is a big guy. There's gonna be like 5'10" corners on the outside. He's just gonna dominate on them, or like you're gonna have to put like a 6'2" or 6'3" corner just so that they can like have a chance of being able to like stifle him. And even then, like, he had the ability to just even win over the top on him. Basically get up and get that ball, track the ball, make sure that he's the one that comes down with it and stuff. So I can't say enough. I've been so for years I've been praying that one of like the Ohio State wide receivers drops to the Cardinals because I knew how important that was to the position, especially when it came to like our offense. But we got the best out of all of them. We got Marvin Harrison Jr. guys. Like, he was the one who was ranked the best out of all those Ohio State wide receivers. And even though like year after year I got disappointed, we got the best one out of all of them. Before even the year started, I thought to myself, we got to put ourselves in position to at least try to get Marvin Harrison Jr. And if we have a chance to draft him, let's not get cute. Let's just do it. Because you know that you're going to keep him for a decade or so.
Yeah, and it's multiple years as well. Like, the one that you tie back to at least is probably the Jamar Chase draft with him and Kyle Pitts. You can even tie back further the Julio Jones draft. Cardinals are just about a few picks away. We got pick 136 is in. We'll be cutting to at least that live moment to go over as far as that is with the Cards. But I do want to say, with this pick coming up, if you want to take a look at some of the last players who have just been selected in round 4, some standouts, obviously Troy Franklin goes. Cardinals took Dadrian Taylor Demerson after they had gotten the likes of Tip Robinson. I believe that the other player, if I remember correctly, Yeah, Tip Raymond. Sorry, not Tip Raymond. Yeah, Robinson earlier. Elijah Jones going and Tip Raymond going. You
Elijah
saw
Jones,
Isaiah
that's
Adams
my
go.
guy.
Yeah, and then Trey Benson, of course, after going Max Melton. We'll talk a bit about Melton, especially because I know there's going to be some dialogue that we're going to have. But the thing, at least, that I see with some of the upcoming picks is Cardinals are on the clock at pick number 138. Malik Washington has just gone over to the believe it is Los Angeles Chargers. So, Marcos, I'm going to go ahead over here. And for those watching live here, we've got our screen that I'll be able to pull up in just a second. We'll be able to see at least the Cardinals pick as it goes. Right now, it is definitely one of those things where there's an anticipation that I have, Marcos, that this could be a wide out. That was one of the things that we heard as far as with tips earlier today, was that the Cardinals could want potentially a wide receiver. Not sure if it's going to be that pick exactly, or if there's something, but we know that they wanted to be able to bring in a bit more size, a bit more verticality. Do you have other guys that you like on the board at this pick? And I will actually go ahead and pull up our PFF little mock draft simulator that has the Arizona Cardinals right here on the clock. Here's some of the best available players. You've got Johnny Wilson, Austin Booker is an edge rusher. Malik Washington's the guy who just went. You've got a linebacker and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. still on the board. That would be one I'd love. Cedric Van Pran at center. One of my guys that I liked, I think, went earlier at center in Tanner Bortolini. Bortolini's one of those guys that makes me think if the Cardinals didn't take him earlier, you might be seeing Arizona be trusting John Gaines to be that center of the future. We've got a couple of other players, Jamari Thrash. Cardinals also could potentially here, if you wanted to, you could go with Brendan Rice. He's a guy local from Chandler. That would be one of the other players that you could look at for the most part. Mo Kamara is an edge rusher that I think I like here. Gabriel Murphy, that's one of our guys I know that has been really appreciated by both Walter Mitchell and by the Cardinal Rule himself, Joe Como. What are your thoughts, at least, for if you have a direction for the Arizona Cardinals here with this pick?
Oh boy, that's going to be a tough one. I didn't know we still had the selection of all these players still. I didn't know Spencer Rattler was still on the board. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. was still on the board. I'm not sure. To be honest with you, like at this point, like I guess a wide receiver would be the direction they'd have to go just so you can get a little bit more depth. But it's kind of like it's a very, very, very what's the word? Like it's very tempting to want to go with Spencer Rattler with all the tools that he has, and to have that guy come like as our
backup quarterback, guy.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. Maybe they might go that direction. I wouldn't think so, but so far, so like as we speak right now, our backup quarterback right now is Desmond Ridder, and I'm not sure if I trust that.
Yeah, and that's something where you look at least how things shook out, Marcos, and the Arizona Cardinals really kind of saved Desmond Ridder almost, if you want to look at it that way. One of the biggest things, at least, that we saw was with the Falcons doing the shock of the draft taking. And this is part of where I'd say is some people say, hey, if you love the quarterback, don't mess around, go and get them. I think that if that's a 21-year-old JJ McCarthy, I think I'm good with it. But if you're going to sit a 24-year-old guy for multiple years, who's been multiple injuries, we don't know if he is good yet at all. Like, that's going to be something that's going to be really, really interesting for the Falcons to try to figure out, because Kirk Cousins just got there. You just drafted a new guy, at least. Like, this would be like if you had said, hey, we're just going to go ahead and sign, Carson Palmer to a huge extension. And then, we're going to go ahead and take Blake Bortles in the top 8. You're like, something doesn't quite add up here if you're a Cardinals fan. Either you got to have a guy on a shorter term deal, or you got to have a guy who's going to be taking over sooner versus later. Ian Rappaport, at least, is doing a little bit of reporting right now. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's talking a little bit about Spencer Rattler is what it seems like as far as with the film on screen. He, of course, was an Arizona product. There was a high school show that had a little bit of, I want to say Not the best look for Spencer Rattler. He seemed a bit entitled, is the word I was looking for. He goes to Oklahoma, loses out that job to Caleb Williams, turns it over a bit much. The vision, there's some questions, but like you said, the arm talent and other stuff is there. I feel like that would be an interesting move because you'd kind of be giving up already on your 5th round pick last year, hoping for a higher optimal guy. I would probably lean toward not taking him at this point, in part because when you look at Rattler and how he's measured up in the past and some of those things, I just don't know if he fits that culture. Like all of these guys have been high motor, high character. And it's like, not to say that Spencer Rattler is like that, but there is going to be something here that we're going to see in the Arizona Cardinals with what they do with this pick today. Is it going to be on offense or defense? Last thoughts before it is official, Marcos.
Well, if I don't know. I heard a report that like Spencer Rattler was he was humbled by losing his job out and then getting sent to South Carolina. Ever since then, he's got a little bit of different attitude. But yeah, he was a very, very cocky and very, very immature quarterback before then, who probably couldn't even take criticism. And it's crazy because he was a local guy, and I didn't even know that. But like coming up from where did he go? Like somewhere in Scottsdale,
South
like
Carolina, South Carolina. Oh yeah, Scott. He was in Scottsdale, I believe. It wasn't Pinnacle. It was I'll remember.
Pinnacle.
I think that it was. Let me see here. Sorry, this is where I'm like trying to remember exactly where the school was, just to make it right. Oh yeah, it was Pinnacle High School. So I was correct. Yeah, and he was one of the best state players that Cardinals. I gotta say Cardinals at least.
Arizona history.
State of Arizona has ever seen. Yeah, just fantastic. As far as for what he was as a high school player, part of why Lincoln Riley went out and got him.
And just like I remember that I saw videos about this guy that they were just kind of determining what the heck was going on with him, what happened. Is a pick in, or is like
pick is in? It hasn't been announced yet. We still got it going at least here.
Maybe they were showing Rattler picks because I thought that's who we selected. I was like, oh, there we go. We're just talking about the guy.
No, they're going over some of the news story at least that they have of everything, though. Although it is interesting that they're talking about acquiring Desmond Ridder, acquiring some of these places here. And it looks like we're going to have the pick announced here in just a second. And all right, we got it. A little bit of it tipped here, but it's going to be out in just a moment at least. But I will say, Marcos, it is an edge rusher.
It's an edge? Look at them. They're giving him a lot of love right now. They're like, hey, man, this guy's still on the board.
Yeah, I mean, it's day 3 for the most part. We haven't seen any teams such as the Raiders or a team like the Giants are teams that potentially could take a flyer on that talent. I do think that Michael Pratt is a guy that teams may actually like more, who's not going to be necessarily having the starting upside, but it's not going to be on those picks. Thomas,
there we go,
by
guys.
The Arizona Cardinals. That is your pick at least. And the Cardinals are now off the clock for another 30 or so picks. Unless they decide to move up, Marcos, let's talk a little bit about Xavier Thomas, even just talking about the Cardinals grabbing an edge rusher here, which is probably the one position that I think they had not really drafted for today.
Well, I'm pulling up his profile as we speak right now because I am not familiar with Xavier Thomas. So let's take a look if my internet can knock crap out on me.
One of the things I think that we can say with Arizona is that there's a bunch of guys who are high motor but lower athletes here. What we've seen with Arizona so far, they have drafted a lot of these guys that have been much higher profile ones as far as tested fine, tested great for the most part. He's a Clemson player that they had for the most part. And we've got some other information I'll be able to pop up here on the screen from some of the draft guys that we have with Shane Hallam says that Xavier Thomas, edge 20, great leverage pass rusher, productive, plenty of experience, a variety of pass rushing moves, and he's a good edge setter. They said that the biggest thing, of course, with it is lacks ideal upsize. And let's be honest, upside, size, yes, upside. That means that you're kind of capped out as a pass rusher. This is one of those places, at least for the most part, that you said the Cardinals would have traded up for an edge rusher. They get a guy who's a bit later. A lot of people actually have liked the pick for the most part. You've got Kyle Krabs saying Chef Monty still cooking in round 5 for the Cardinals. You've got, I think it was there it is, PFF grade, 153 QB pressures, 22 career sacks at Clemson. This is a profile of a guy who's probably one of those players that I think when you talk about a player from a big school, go in the draft much later. This is probably a day 2 type of edge rusher. He's not going to go round 1 as far as with maybe more, like we said, athleticism capped. But he is also one of those guys that isn't going to end up going round 6 or 7 because he just is too productive. What you always look for, Marcos, is you look for a combination of you want guys who are productive, or if they're not productive, you want them to at least be athletic. Because if you have a guy that's not productive and not athletic, like you're probably not going to suddenly overnight blossom into this, productive freak on the NFL football field if you weren't in college. If you want to be able to get productive and athletic, those are the guys who usually go in the first round. The guys who are productive but are maybe not quite the elite upside, that's the rounds where they're going to go to. Seems like he's a guy that the Cardinals probably are taking that gets added to the rest of the pass rushers. And it's going to be interesting to see what goes on with Cam Thomas, Marcos, because the Cardinals regime that they had, not the same regime that drafted Cam Thomas. I would wonder if Xavier Thomas has a chance to take over. It'd be a Thomas for Thomas swap.
Well, like I said, they shouldn't even be a swap because they should just try to bump him inside more often and have him have him go up against guards instead of going up against tackles in a stand-up position. Because he's more of a traditional, like, hand on the ground type of person as well. Just like when I mentioned about Darius Robinson. Well, this guy's a traditional edge. This guy's a stand-up guy. He rushes from like the outside exclusively almost. So he's going to be a person you're going to throw in there as competition. Upside not as high. Obviously, we got him in the 5th round, so that's at this point that's how it is. You select your guys in the 5th round because you're trying to take shots at them. You're trying to see what can you get from these people. So he's just adding another person in the competition for the edge position. And sometimes you get lucky and you get somebody in the 5th round and he ends up becoming like a starter or even more so a Pro Bowler. But we all know that with edge class, first of all, edge class this year is not as deep and not as strong as before. Second, edge rushers, like, they kind of start falling off a hill after the first 2 rounds. So with this guy, I mean, like I said, it's just depth and competition. So, I would say in the 5th round, it's a good pick. And if the guy gets a second contract, then it's a hit.
Yeah. Even if sometimes you get a guy in the 5th round who plays through one contract, signs for a more expensive contract for a team that needs one of those players elsewhere, it's just one of those places that I think Cardinals have struggled with in the past. We got to see last year that Dante Stills was able to get a time of being able to rush for the Arizona Cardinals. We were able to see other guys that they drafted and B.J. Ojulari get on the field as a rookie. It's strange to think that was how low some of the expectations had been for Cardinals rookies, Marcos. Like, every Cardinals player that went in, with the exception of John Gaines, who got hurt, had brought value to the Cardinals last year. Obviously, Paris Johnson started the whole year. Ojulari was able to work himself in. Garrett Williams looked good, was able to get a couple of picks, I believe, working into the nickel corner. Obviously, Michael Wilson was the guy that looks like your wide receiver too. And then Clayton Tune, like the pick that I knew was probably going to come last year, I told people was going to be, they're going to have to draft a round 3 to round 6 quarterback just because they don't have any youth at that spot. And you can't just sign a free agent because you lose out on some of the arm and athleticism. That's what goes in the draft, and you always have to pay a QB tax. Even Owen Papo got on the field in the last game of the season. Really, just the guy who I think is hurt the most by all of this, Marcos, is probably Keitrell Clark. Would be one of the areas I'd be curious about. Cardinals have drafted 2 cornerbacks. He had played some in the nickel last year. And with some of their signings and everything, it's going to be really interesting to see if he ends up carving out a niche or not for Arizona. What are some of your thoughts, at least, too, on just what the overall defense looks like? If you position some of their guys together, you've probably got a decent setup for the Cardinals, with an exception of linebacker being that sort of a guy that the Cardinals would probably want to get late anyway.
The way it's set up right now is I'm seeing a lot of depth on the cornerback position. Now, when I posted that tweet and I mentioned about like the cornerback room and stuff, we're putting up a lot of people who are hopefuls or like projects type of people. That's why I criticized the move back and then the pick at number 43 for Mad Max at 43, because he kind of like projects as like a Marco Wilson type of player, high upside with the athleticism, but it's raw, incredibly raw. So to me, I just didn't understand that pick at all, because you need to put somebody that you have confidence that either can become that starter or can become that Pro Bowl type of corner in that position, or at least throw somebody in there that like has high upside that can compete in there. But obviously that's not what happened in that situation. I'm like, when you mentioned about like Keitrell Clark, it kind of tears my heart apart, because like he was one of my favorite players and one of my favorite picks from last year. So I really hope he's not on the chopping block. I really hope he can still carve out a niche in this Cardinals defense. I've been hoping they just throw him in the slot, because that's supposed to be where he was projected at. And of course, they got Garrett Williams there. I wish they would just bump Garrett Williams to the outside and then put Keitrell in the slot. But we have more competition coming in from the cornerback room. We got two corners coming in. We have SMB projected as our first, like our number one corner. So as far as the defensive back room is concerned, there's just a lot of like, hey, one of these guys has to pan out, or one of these guys is going to flourish as our top corner after this year. And we're just hoping somebody from that room can ascend from that position. So it's not like I have the utmost confidence there. But that's why you get somebody to help out in the pass rush. Like, you have BJ Ojulari from last year. He had some good snaps at that position. He's going to go into his year 2. So he's projected to be like a top, like, edge rusher. We got him last year as one of the top edge rushers. So hopefully he can ascend as well. And of course, like, addressing that middle part with the signing. I forgot what his name was from, I believe it's Johnson from, we signed him from the Bears. He was supposed to be a run stuffer. So we're at least trying to do something as far as addressing the run, so that way our defense could give our offense chances to be able to get on the field and not get in a situation where we're just getting steamrolled when we give up a lead. So the state of our defense is, I'll be quite honest with you, it's still up in the air with me. It's just going to come down to how these young guys develop, because they are getting younger at a lot of positions, and this defense is going to go through a lot of fluctuations, and it's going to be interesting to see where players land and where they're at, and even if they stay with us, because we have a lot of players that are just either just floating on the roster, and we don't know what to do with them. Zaven and Cam Thomas being two of those players. We don't know if they're going to float around, or if we're going to keep them, or if we're just going to push them out.
Yeah, totally. We've got, at least on our screen for those watching our video, a little bit of the Senior Bowl, at least, where you get to see some of the pass rushing moves for the most part from Xavier Thomas. Again, bigger guy. The athleticism is something that I think that people will be a bit surprised about as far as for how he stands out. When you're productive and an athletic, and the question then is, why didn't you go in earlier rounds? There usually are things that can pop up, such as injuries or other parts, or like people have said, there may not be as much room for growth. That's one of the areas that I think the Cardinals, what we've seen is, they'll take guys who are older, but they will take the upside with some of the younger guys. And then with older players, they're going to be actually looking at, some of the guys who can probably come in and help you right now. So when looking at Xavier Thomas, this is a good example, at least pulling up his mock draftable chart. You can see he is a smaller overall type of guy at 6'2", 244 pounds. That's pretty much closer to Hassan Reddick's ties. Reddick, I think, was even lighter, coming out at like 235 or so. But you can see, at least as far as with being able to have a good bench press, broad jump, head split, didn't do, it looks like, a lot of those movement drills. A lot of times you want to look at the 3-cone and be able to see how those guys get around. One of the things, at least, that stands out when you take a look at his profile compared to all the other athletes is the size. He is going to be probably above average in his height, his weight, and in a lot of his measurables, it's above what you'd want to see. And that's where I think a lot of times you ask the question mark goes when scouting: where do guys win? And some guys, it's they win with speed. Some guys, they're really polished. Marvin Harrison Jr., people looked at him and went, oh, he wins like pretty much everywhere, except for maybe yards after the catch. But it's like, that was one of the reasons why he was considered the best player in the draft, was he had multiple places of winning. Some of the comparisons you can at least see for him here athletically. When you put him at defensive end, you look at him and Kayvon Thibodeau, you can see that he's going to be a little bit, I think, heavier for the most part than someone like Kayvon. Kayvon also was an elite speed to power athlete. You can see some similarities with speed to power, not the same speed, maybe not the same power, but Marcos, that's part of why you're getting 5th round versus 5th overall with some of these picks. One of the players that I kind of like here as a comp you can go over with is D Ford, who didn't really do a lot of the different measurements at the combine itself. But when you're talking about smaller guy, not the same height, not the same weight, D Ford, of course, being 6'2", about 250 pounds or so, a guy who wasn't the fastest, but was able to be effective as far as, hey, starting caliber edge rusher for the most part, was on a really good team for the most part. The Chiefs moved to the Niners for a year or two, I believe, as well. That's kind of what you're looking for in the 5th round, is not for that guy who's going to be a star, but sometimes that guy who's just going to learn in year one, back up, have some production. And I think we've seen a little bit of that with how the Cardinals have addressed excuse me, their pass rushing before, because the player that I liken some of these guys to is like a Victor Dimukeji. Dimukeji is a bit smaller, obviously, than Xavier Thomas. Didn't have the exact same as production, but grinder, a hustler. He's able to get some fumbles, get some sacks for the most part. He's been able to make a living on special teams. That's really what you're looking for, I think, when you're talking about what these type of day 3 picks are going to be, Marcos.
Yeah, and I really like the way that he was so that stance that he would take on. That's, if you guys are very familiar with that stance, if you guys know how a person who like has been like not demolishing, like making the Cardinals life a living heck is Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa has that same stance at get off when he's lining up at the line of scrimmage before he starts taking off and taking on these offensive tackles. So the way he does is he gets in that 3-point stance, has his hand cranked all the way back, and he's trying to level his back almost parallel to the ground, so that when he takes off, he's taking off from the bottom up, which is something that I really like about like pass rushers that like line up in the 3-point stance. I'm not so much getting into like the whole 2-point stance type of thing, except if you're a speed rusher, but this guy is trying to win from the bottom up. So he's lining up in that stance, taking off, and I really like the way he was handling those tackles. And like they, for the most part, like I said, in the 5th round, they're lottery tickets. They're people that you're just hoping to get something out of. So if you get something out of, you get anything out of anybody from the 5th round, that's already like seen as a win. Now, would I have gone a different direction? Probably, but like I didn't know this guy was even considered, and now that he's considered and we actually picked him, I'm actually impressed with him. So I think that was a good pick by Monti Ford. And so obviously you guys see me like Murphy has to, he's in the background right now. So
yeah, sorry about that. I had to get
Very
myself added back in. I was like, I can't hear you over my headset at all, Marco. So I figured out at least my audio issues. Love going live for the most part with any of that. So it happens. Yeah. All right. So let's now talk about a little bit of the most controversial draft pick thus far. Arizona Cardinals in round 2 did trade back from the likes of a Kool-Aid McKinstry, from the likes of a guy a lot of Cardinals fans had wanted in Cooper DeJean. They trade back from him. Oh, obviously, I think people saw your tweet, Marcos, at least. You also saw guys like Braden Fisk, defensive tackle, went to the Rams. And then you saw 3 cornerbacks, and DeJean, McKinstry, and Kamari Lassiter all go off of the board right before Arizona is able to make that pick. That's something that I think we saw with the Falcons moving up for Rook O'Horo.
That's
exactly.
What they keep saying. Or
Rook. It sounds like something that Scooby-Doo would say. We gotta love it, at least for the most part. But they take Max Melton, and this is a pick that I was actually excited for. This is a pick you were not excited for, Marcos.
Just mostly because of the raw prospect again. Now, do these people, do corners like this, can they pan out in the league? They can, but for the most part, especially when their technique, if they're raw and their technique is not there, they need a couple of years to be able to develop that technique. And the way that we treat our cornerbacks, and it's just not the Cardinals, it's just every team, because the cornerback room is so limited, is we usually throw those people out there into the fire, and we don't give them enough time to develop that technique. Now, person that comes into mind, and everybody's gonna roll their eyes when they hear this, and I wasn't like, the funny thing is, like, I wasn't so low on Marco Wilson because I saw the talent there, but we saw how we threw him out into the fire. He had ups and downs. He had good games and he had bad games. He had games that were just almost like they were close. They were almost there, but his technique can never catch up to what we had been asking for. Because then, like last year, he comes in as our number one corner, so now he's projected to have to take that first wide receiver, that opposite receiver, that number one receiver, that's going to give him a lot of trouble. And look the way it turned out. It became a disaster after like 5 or 6 games. It seemed like Cardinals fans couldn't stop wishing that we would just get this guy off our roster and whatnot. So with this pick, he was the first corner taken by the Cardinals, third pick of the draft. And when you move back, I heard that like Monty Ossenford is using a shotgun approach, which is like get as many picks as you can, throw it at the wall, see what sticks and whatnot. But with moving back and knowing that you have players in, I think Johnny Newton even went after we traded back. You also have to weigh the positives and the negatives. Does he trade back and still get his guy? That's awesome. That's a brilliant move. But you still run that risk. Will he move back and all those guys are gone? And I believe the Mad Max pick was kind of like a panic pick. Like, hey, let's get we need a corner. Let's get the next one that's on the board. This guy projects to be a higher end athletic, a corner, 5'10", another 5'10" cornerback in our room, not a lengthy guy. And we got him. So like now we just gotta hope that somebody like this can pan out. But I mean, that's what Monty wants to do. He wants to go with the shotgun approach. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's where the controversy that a lot of people felt was. A lot of people were like, oh, this is a terrible pick because you had these other guys on the board. You trade back. You didn't trade back up then to be able to grab them. Reason why I honestly like the pick, Marcos, is because there has been enough question marks I've had about some specific areas of the game of Cooper DeJean and of Kool-Aid McKinstry. Yep. And the biggest area overall, I think, at least with Kool-Aid, when you watch a lot of this is something I watched Kool-Aid previously because I thought, hey, he could be the pick at 27. The biggest concern that I had was he ran in the 4.4s at the combine and answered some of those questions about his speed. But when you watch some of the areas of tape, either he played a bit injured or he just didn't have necessarily that top end speed where he could cover burners. That was one of the things that when you're talking about being a number one outside corner, if you're a guy who's big, tall, lengthy, can match up with guys, can play with good technique, then you're probably going to be able to do pretty well for the most part against a lot of those other bigger, more outside receivers, the more Michael Wilson types. But let's say that you're playing a team like, let's say the Miami Dolphins. You got Tyreek Hill flexed outside, you get Jalen Waddle flexed outside, and you don't have a lot of top end speed. Suddenly you're like, okay, if you're a safety, which way is Buddha and Jalen going to go? Because if you don't have the ability to keep up with some of those guys, that's going to make it tough. And one of the things that stands out when you look at this will be from Dane Brugler's The Beast, which I do recommend. You don't have a subscription to The Athletic. It is more than well worth it, even if just for this each year. Guy ran in a 4.3s for the 40-yard dash, 4.39. We see on film that he's able to keep up with some of those guys who have that big speed for the most part. Super explosive athlete. He jumped 40 I think it was inches in the vertical jump and then 11 feet in the broad jump, ran in the 4.2s for his short shuttle for the most part at his pro day, which a lot of times you'll see guys who will weigh in at the combine and then they say, I'm not going to run this drill. They weigh in at their pro day. Then sometimes it'll flip flop where you're like, hey, I'm going to weigh in at the combine. I'm not doing any drills. Oh, by the way, I'm not weighing in at my pro day. So you're like, okay, you basically are going to cut weight to run fast at the combine, then gain that weight back, or you're going to have that weight at the combine, cut it, and then only do the drills at your pro day. The biggest thing, at least I think with Melton that I saw was when it came to between him and a Cooper DeJean, the biggest concern I had with Cooper DeJean was when I watched back a lot of his tape, he really did not play a lot of man coverage. He played in zone coverage, and a lot of times I'm watching him, he plays in zone coverage, and he doesn't flip his hips. So when you talk about flipping your hips as a defensive back, let's say someone tries to cross your face, and then they cross in front of it the other way. You've got your legs going one way with your body. You got to suddenly quickly flip either around, or you got to flip your hips to the other side quickly because you have to keep up with that guy in coverage. You've got some guys who are elite athletes at changing direction. And I really didn't see a lot of that on Cooper DeJean's film. He also didn't run any of those drills. He's coming off of injury. He tested great in the other athletic drills. But when you're like, all right, I look at on film and I see a guy who moves slowly in coverage, who's super fast, an elite athlete, but who also played a lot more zone coverage at the line. The biggest thing I thought of in my head was, okay, I don't think it's going to be exactly the same, but I would hate if the Cardinals would draft a guy and they struggle to say, is he a corner? Is he a safety? Like, where do we kind of put this player? And that would be a similar issue to Isaiah Simmons that we saw down the road, where you love the player, but that was the one concern I had was like, if we're going to get a cornerback, and if you're going to get a guy who's going to cover, you got to have those flexible hips. And that was the one big problem that Isaiah Simmons had that kind of spelled why he's had to move the linebacker and stayed with the Giants, is he just wasn't able to really develop in that line as a safety. And as a linebacker, his smaller size and how he would play downhill just hasn't necessarily been able to have that same ability for coverage that the Cardinals needed. And that was part of the reason why when they traded back and took Melton, I was like, there's a guy who's got flexible hips, who's got the speed. He answers questions that I had about the likes of Kool-Aid McKinstry and Cooper DeJean.
Well, I'll agree with you with Cooper DeJean. He is a zone. He's projected as a zone corner. He's projected as a zone corner as also somebody who can run a system the right way in today's. So today's defenses is more man matching zone schemes. Basically, you pass off like wide receivers or just any type of receiver off to another person, but you're not passing him off as in like, hey, this is my zone. I'm not following him further than this yard. It's all about like, how far is this person's route going? Which direction is he going? You're sticking with him until you hand him off. So Cooper DeJean had the ability to be able to read these things beforehand. That's the reason why he was projected so high. Like, hey, he knew where to be at in his zone scheme so that he was never in a position where he was too late, that he was above the wide receiver and not so much trying to catch up to him, play trail technique. He was always playing over the top. So he's a guy who was always looking at the quarterback and watching his eyes and also keeping an eye on whoever comes into his zone. So that was the one thing about him. When it comes to man coverage skills, he was not good in man coverage. He was a liability in man coverage. So you pick this guy, you're putting him in the slot or you're putting him as safety. And that's what I projected him as. I thought if the Cardinals made that pick, he's going to be Buddha's replacement. Basically, he's going to be sitting on the bench for a couple of years and then later on taking over that position for Budda Baker. And he's also kind of like, you see his stature and the way he like moves. He's kind of like tiny when it comes to like how his footsteps are. Not saying like his size, but the way he like moves. He moves with short like strides and whatnot. So when you're talking about somebody who's going to get beat over the top, he's somebody that's always going to be in trail technique and he's going to get beat. So that's the thing about Cooper DeJean that I saw. Kool-Aid McKinstry, that speed doesn't really bother me too much. When it comes to like 4.4 speed, it's not the end of the world when it comes to cornerbacks, because most of the time you have these corners playing so off the line of scrimmage a lot of times that they're always in a way that they're facing their guy or they're up on the line of scrimmage and they're either bump coverage or they do bail, like they do what is it called? I had the technique. It's basically
it's like you basically press and then you bail as quick as possible. Press bail.
Exactly. Press bail technique, which is basically you get up on the line of scrimmage and then right before they're about to take off, you pretty much are in press alignment and then you take off and you try to stay over the top of a wide receiver. So you always kind of have a step over the wide receiver, but this idea that you have to be like a fast like cornerback to succeed in the NFL, I disputed that with somebody else on Twitter. I said, look, you're not, the corner's facing the wide receiver. He's not in lining up right next to the wide receiver in a track meet and stuff. He has to still flip his hips and figure out where he's going. So that's my thing about Max Melton. He can always prove me wrong. I really hope he does. I really hope he doesn't go through that same trajectory that a Marco Wilson went when we picked him up, thought, hey, he has high end speed. He's an athletic freak guy, like, and then now he's with the Patriots and I don't even know if he's in the Patriots anymore.
Yeah, that's one of the areas where I think Marco was a guy that, for whatever reason, we knew that he fell to the fourth. Cardinals jumped up because they needed him. He got pressed into being a cornerback one very quickly. Melton's a guy who people had various grades on. He could have gone anywhere, I think people said, from round number 2 all the way down onto day 3. And so a lot of times you're like, the biggest thing I saw was it tells us a lot about what the Cardinals are doing. they didn't go out and draft a zone corner. They drafted a guy who can play some of this press coverage. And then they also drafted another guy who can play press coverage in Elijah Jones, who's a Senior Bowl guy. Pretty underrated, obviously, as far as he was a guy that not many people talked about of going as early, I think, as he did for Elijah Jones. But I think that when you're talking about what the Cardinals have really done in this draft, Marcos, they got a wide receiver. They got a pass rusher. They now gotten a heir apparent to James Conner, and Dadrian Taylor Demerson is probably going to be more of an heir apparent, maybe to a Buda Baker. Yeah. But they've really invested into physicality on the offensive line, physicality with the running back, and physicality on the defense, but not as much physicality as I thought they would do. They have spent 3 picks on the defensive backs. And I think that shows, Marcos, they're trusting their coaches with these linebackers. They think they can find some gems probably in around 5, 6, or 7. And I think that is a great way. So as we sign off here for today, Cardinals are picking again today, much later in the NFL draft. They've got pick 27 from the Houston Texans still to go today in round 5. What's been your favorite draft pick that the Cardinals have made thus far on day 2, and maybe even if it's today, day 3 of the NFL draft?
I literally just had his name, and it was Elijah. God damn it. I had his name for a second. I'm sorry, guys. I know, like,
it's Elijah Jones, sir. Elijah Jones, I believe, is the one that is.
He's my favorite pick. He was my favorite pick in the 4th round. He was the last pick in the 4th round. No, 3rd round. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, I know I'm not on my rounds or anything like that, but
it's been a long bunch of draft coverage, so I think I'm a little bit tired myself too.
Yep, it's been a lot of picks, and he's my favorite one out of the 3rd round. 3rd rounders are still considered somewhat like fringe 2nd rounders, possibly first rounder that like dropped for any reason, and just the size is what really gets me, and I really hope this guy gets in there and he competes for the outside guy, because we need an outside corner. So who he now has to share a room with Marvin Harrison Jr., who, by the way, having a wide receiver like that on your team is only going to make your cornerbacks learn better. Hey, this guy's big. This guy's going to beat me up. And Marvin Harrison Jr., he's a very physical receiver, even at his size. He is not afraid to put hands on you. So these guys are going to have a tough time, but the whole saying says iron sharpens iron. So now these guys have this guy in their own room, along with Michael Wilson, 2 physical tall receivers, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4",
adding size back to the Cardinals.
So there you go. We're back to it with the size on the outside to help our quarterback that like projects as a really good thrower of the football to the outside, a good perimeter thrower, a guy who can like throw it up there and drop it in the basket and let this guy compete. Remember AJ Green a few years ago in 2021? That was Kyler Murray's deep target. Hey man, I'm just gonna throw it down there. He's gonna catch it. I know he's gonna catch it.
Yeah. Red zone percentage is a huge thing, I think, as well. And if I had to pick my favorite pick, for the most part, at least, that I've seen for this NFL draft day 2 and day 3, it has to be Trey Benson, the running back out of Florida State. This was my running back 1. My highest rated running back had him over the likes of Jonathan Brooks. And some of that is because there can be not just stylistic fits that you can see, but there's also areas of talent. These are some of the highlights that he has. Ran in the 4.3s at 215 pounds. You're talking about that. He also isn't just a smooth, breakaway running back. He is pretty physical, and he's got very good contact balance. So contact balance means you get hit and you keep running with the ball. It means that when guys are trying to tackle you. So what's really fun is that you'll actually see him running. He'll actually erase angles. So like right here, you can see contact balance. He picks up an extra 4 or 5 yards. So the way that I looked at it was said, all right, is his vision top notch? I think there's room to be able to improve, but 2 of the biggest things that I liked about Benson were he really gives you essentially that home run threat, that lightning bolt that can go with James Conner's thunder. But he also runs in the way where when you talk about James Conner, it's like, all right, it's 3rd and 4. He runs, gets contacted 2 yards into the play, still runs forward and is able to get the first down. That's one of those things, at least I think, fits the Cardinals. I think Benson's actually going to be one of those guys that you're probably going to want later, even in not just fantasy drafts, but he doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires either. He never had 20 carries in a game at Florida State. And really, the biggest concern with him was the one ACL tear he had. But now you're talking about, you can see the vision. You're like, all right, Kyler's got his speed. You already have James Conner. You add a Marvin Harrison Jr. That's going to open things up for Trey McBride. You've got Michael Wilson on the outside. You obviously are going to feature Greg Dortch underneath. What do the Cardinals do on day 2? They bring in one of the best blocking tight ends of the draft, who's a freak. We'll talk more about him with our Monday show.
Yep.
And they bring in a freak at the running back position. And I love this because if you're the Cardinals, and let's say James Conner goes down with an injury, you're probably getting another issue like you saw last year. It's Amari DiMercato. We obviously got to see, I think it was the running back, was it Johnson, I believe, out from the Jets, who came over. This is a guy who's got the upside to actually be your starter as of 2025. You get to say the Cardinals, instead of just having this window with this talented amount of players and it all just kind of dries up, you're now getting the Cardinals going out, getting that guy, getting him that snaps his rookie year, and then being ready to take over in a big role next year. That's why this was my favorite pick in the draft. And that'll wrap it up for us here, at least. We're about an hour or so away, I think, from the Cardinals' next pick minus a trade up. We'll obviously send out some of our takes as far as when it comes to X.com, Twitter.com, and we'll have some more coming on Revenge of the Birds as well. Marcos, if you do want to be able to shout out to where our watchers and people, thank you guys again for tuning in for draft season. Super excited. Next week we're going to be doing a full recap on Monday, and the next Thursday we'll be having Cardinals former analyst and current with Compare.bet Kyle Odegaard is planning to be able to join us as well to talk about what he saw from the Cardinals draft picks in offseason and the direction of the team going forward. Marcos, if you want to send us off today.
Well, you can find me right here at Pancake Soul, right down there. You can find me on X. It's spelled exactly that way. That's why I spelled it that way. And so you'll find me there. You'll find me some of my articles at AZ Sports Underground. I know I haven't written in a long time, but you can find some of my old gems, especially if you want to see something about Isaiah Simmons. I wrote like 5 articles on him. So
there you go.
But I did write about a lot about the defense. 2 very important articles from last year was about like zone, like man matching zone schemes, like and positional, like position, basically what these coaches refer position wise, like apex, hook defender, and corner. So if you're interested in reading that, you can look up that article. And as always, you can find me here at Redbird Reboot alongside with Blake Murphy. And we'll see you guys on Monday. We're going to do our full recap on that day.